Cheide.
In this 3-minute rules, we will be looking at the combat phase, and in particular the rules for flee and pursue rolls. All of this can be found on page 56 of the large 8th edition rulebook. If a unit fails its break test, it must flee and might be destroyed as it runs. Oftentimes it is here that the most devastation happens from combat. For this example, we will say that the High Elves have failed their break test and are now forced to flee. Although the High Elves are forced to flee, the victorious unit can now choose to either pursue or to restrain pursuit. Having been victorious, the dwarves now are frothing at the mouth to run down their enemies as they flee. In order to prevent this, we need to roll a leadership test for them to restrain from pursuing their enemies. In the case of the dwarves, we have a leadership of 9, so a 9 or less will allow them to remain in place. And there is a 10. 10 is a failed leadership roll, and therefore, regardless of how restrained they want to be, the dwarves will chase after their high elf enemies and try to run them down. Were the dwarves to have rolled a 9 or less, they could stay in place. And sometimes remaining in place is the best strategic option for combat. With the intentions of the victorious unit declared, it's time to see just how badly the losing unit wants to escape and calculate the distance it flees. Fleeing units do not move their movement distance, but instead roll a 2d6 to show that their fleeing is rather random. Other kinds of models or units may in fact roll 3d6, for example, cavalry that has the swift stride rule, but for most infantry you will roll 2d6. And in this case, the High Elves will flee a total of 10 inches. Having rolled the dice for the fleeing unit, we may now roll the dice for the unit that is pursuing. In this case of the dwarves, we will be rolling 2d6. A roll of 6 by the dwarves is not enough to catch the fleeing unit, and therefore we may move on to moving the fleeing and pursuing units. Were the dwarves, however, to roll equal to or greater to the number of the fleeing unit, in this case a 10 or above, the dwarves would then cut down the fleeing unit where they stand, and the fleeing unit would be removed from the game entirely. In reality, not all the fleeing troops will have been slain, but any who survived will be so broken in spirit that there's no chance of them fighting again this day. With that, we come to the conclusion of this 3-minute rules on the combat phase and flee and pursue rolls. Thank you for joining us here today at Grey Army Gaming for the future of fantasy.